Chapter 17. At last, when my bones couldn't bear another chilblain and my red knee socks had seen better days, spring arrived. Not the date on the calendar, but the magnificent period seed packets describe as when all fear of frost is past. The time when a young man's, in this case my 4-year-old's fancy, finds ways to convince his mother to take him on a hike. I knew it was spring at Holgate due to the riot of color from the rhododendrons and azaleas that Corey's father had planted along the top of the rockery. Grandpa Adolph's endless joy was working with plants, whether at his job at the Bowles mansion or at the homes of his children. The Happy Valley house didn't boast beautiful flowering shrubs, but Corey assured me his father was busy planning. I was pleased. I always relished the company of Grandpa Adolph. Although his accent sometimes bridged our communication, we usually managed a common understanding. My presence always seemed to cheer him up. He appreciated my music and made it known. We never lacked laughter. In other words, he was one of my favorites, and I knew I was one of his. A grand occasion at the Gustafsson home was the autumn fruit harvest. Grandpa picked the apples from the 2 trees while Grandma Elise devoted days to the stove, stirring and sifting the contents of the large aluminum kettles, making applesauce. Some of the prunes found their way into mason jars, but most journeyed to a cannery for drying. The most strenuous job involved picking grapes from the vine canopy shading the entire backyard. All the family participated in this. Grandma Elise made numerous jelly batches stored in the canning room in the basement, but most of the grapes wound up in the large oak barrels, destined to be wine. Grandpa would present this wine for every occasion in a lovely cut glass pitcher. Most years, the wine lasted from harvest to harvest. Even though Grandpa enjoyed his wine, I never found him overindulging. But the family loved recounting a story suggesting that in his earlier days, he might have occasionally over-imbibed. According to the tale, his father-in-law, Nikolai Reinhold Lepso, purser on a passenger ship traveling from Hamburg, Germany to North Cape, Norway, had come to visit. Adolf accompanied him back to the ship. When Adolf didn't return on time, Elise began to worry that he had gone on board for a farewell drink, and feared one drink may have led to more. Finally, she called the dock to inquire. She was told, "Yes, the ship has long since departed, and yes, I saw someone running back and forth and calling for a lowering of the gangplank as the ship sailed." The next day, Adolf finally arrived home, thoroughly humiliated. Although we had no flowering shrubs to speak of, we had buds on our apple tree and a few other struggling trees in the orchard. The back pasture was green and lush. Corey has fenced in the small area below the house, but the grass there remained grazed by Saudi, our horse. So we had negotiated with Arlo about the back pasture. Arlo was upset about losing grazing land and shared some alarming facts. "You don't want to turn that horse out on so much green grass, she'll get heaves." Seeing my obvious ignorance, he explained, "That means she'll bloat up, and you'll have to jam a big needle into her belly to relieve the pressure." Not entirely convinced by Arlo's narrative, it provided an idea. If we wanted a reduced feed bill, we could cut the grass for hay, thus avoiding the traumatic needle aspect. Corey's response was, "If you're going to store hay, you'll need a dry place, so you better start planning a new roof." He was right. There was hardly any roof over our designated hay storage spot, unless you counted the rafters as such. But I didn't think there was any rush. I figured we'd expect a typical dry summer and could begin the roof work later. I asked Bill, the horse trader, who visited every week or so trying to sell us a calf, "Don't you let the grass ripen before you cut it?" Bill gave me a look that suggested that he was struggling to hide his disbelief at my ignorance, then explained, "No, you start cutting as soon as the rains stop." This meant that we were pushed for time. Corey suggested corrugated aluminum sheets. Sig and I could get it done in a few days. The thought of Sig on the roof gave me chills. After a barn door accident, I was still having nightmares. But then I had a lucky break. Mrs. Carter needed strawberry pickers. I dispatched Freya and Sig off with a stern lecture about putting in an honest day's work, warning them about the severe consequences of throwing berries. When Corey estimated the price of aluminum sheets, I was shocked. "What's wrong with good old-fashioned shingles? Didn't the pioneers use those?" That would take too long. Well, the pioneers didn't have more hours in the day than we do. No, but neither did they have to spend every evening and all day Saturday working on their employees' benefit statements. By the time we'd factor for labor, the cost would be about the same as shingles, and aluminum would make a much sturdier roof. But darling, we don't include labor when we do the work ourselves. We? I quickly reassured him. I'm planning to be your right-hand man and work with you every step of the way. Don't you remember when Rosemary Young and I helped roof the Cascade Ski Club practically single-handed? This had been my modest joke. My friend and I had cooperated with 4 men on the roof for one afternoon, but we never shied away from the effort, hammering nails while they did tasks like running up and down ladders, changing scaffolding, etc., which we didn't consider actual roofing at all. With the enticing prospect of a happy collaborator, Corey reconciled himself to shingles. Driven by a noble sentiment, I volunteered to go to the lumberyard to pick them up. Corey was doubtful, but relented. As Eric and I climbed into the truck, he called out, "Get decent ones!" I switched the truck into low gear, ready to start down the drive. Confused, I wondered what he meant. Of course, I'd pick good ones. At the lumberyard, the salesman listened sympathetically, and then gently corrected me. Apparently, pioneers didn't use shingles. They used shakes, and some of their barns were still standing. Hadn't I noticed? What came to my attention was that most of the old barns seemed to be just waiting for a gust of wind before relinquishing their hold on the uprights. The salesman highlighted a colossal stack of shakes. The most economical shakes since the Vanport flood. You can leave 14 inches exposed to the weather, and they'll cost only half as much as shingles. I couldn't comprehend leaving inches exposed to the weather, but I understood the principle of price. The extra roof money stirred ideas in my mind. Perhaps a pig. If I hadn't been in such high spirits, I may have given his next remark more consideration. After all, a barn doesn't need the absolute best roof. However, I bought the shakes, assuring myself that a cheap price tag didn't necessarily equate to inferior quality. But when Corey saw my purchase, he was furious. Not so much at me as at himself for sending me on such a task. I should know you can't resist a bargain. Darling, the salesman said we could expose these 14 inches to the weather. Well, let me tell you, these shakes are subpar, and if we hope to keep the rain out, we'll be pushing our luck if we expose more than 5, which means we'll need twice the amount of shakes. There went my pig money, absorbed back into the roofing project. But come on, let's install the first course and see how it goes. My troubles began with the first ladder rung, a solid 3 feet off the ground. That's Corey for you. He builds everything for fearless, long-legged giants. He's so nimble that he finds it difficult to understand why others can't effortlessly climb 100 feet of rope or leap from the church steeple to the choir loft. Just relax, was his advice, which is perfectly ridiculous because if I ever did, I'd fall immediately to the very bottom of whatever deep, dark something or other I was crossing at the moment. As always, he launched me up to my starting position. From there, I was left to my own devices, an unreliable guide. As we laid the first row, I began to release my guilt. Forgetting for a moment that I was 60 feet up and could plummet to the ground with the slip of a shingle nail, I started to appreciate the task. Honestly, honey, these don't seem too bad. In fact, I can't recall seeing better. Of course you wouldn't. You're always looking at rejects, and there's no question about it. We can't expose these more than 5 inches, he grumbled. The view from atop the roof was terrific. We could see down into Pleasant Valley and beyond to the towns of Gresham and Oregon City. And a few miles east is boring, I mused. Corey interrupted. It's a shame we didn't move to that property. It probably had a good roof. Soon I got so good at laying shakes I discovered I could work and cite Bible verses at the same time. The Lord is my shepherd. Discard the bad ones, Corey interrupted, throwing several shakes off the roof. I was taken aback. There went not just the pig money, but possibly next month's grocery funds as well. I shall not want. By the time I needed to start dinner, my body was all aching and racked with pain, as the old song goes. Looking back, I fully expected to see a vast shingled area. To my surprise, we had only just begun. I began having nightmares about being sentenced to 20 years on the shakes pile. As the days rolled on, there always seemed to be 100 things more important than roofing, like practicing the piano. But how was I ever going to play again with bruised and bleeding fingers? Why didn't you warn me it would take so long? I chided Corey. He had grown immune to my complaints. However, complaints are often the origins of innovation. I eventually discovered the assembly line method, setting 8 or 10 shakes in position along the guide before going back to nail them all at once. Innovation also sparked inspection. The inspector discovered a few of my shakes had slipped. Damn it, didn't you nail? A few of my nails had obviously missed their mark. Corey set about correcting my mistakes, tactfully suggesting, "Go rest a while. It's when you're overly tired that accidents are likely to happen." Dejected, I trudged to the house, sat at the kitchen table, and cried. I knew he was unhappy with me, but he wouldn't hold a grudge. He never did. In truth, I had grown weary of roofing. However, I had no right to complain. If we had used aluminum, we'd probably be halfway done by now. I wanted to ask God for a miracle. Something like having an angel come along and finish the job, not in the twinkling of an eye necessarily, but at least by the time we had hay to store.